Hello, everyone. Bonjour. It's 8 o'clock in the morning here in Paris. What time is it in Perth, Mr.
It's
Dougiamas?
3 o'clock in the afternoon.
Oh, no. So you had lunch already. So
Yep.
thank you for joining us at this third day of ePIC conference, fully online this year. And so we have the pleasure to listen now to you because you accepted to present a keynote around Open EdTech, open recognition. So, Monsieur Martin Dougiamas, you can now speak to the world.
Merci, Philippe, Serge, and Perrine, and everyone else watching. Hello. I have a lot of things I can be talking about. I tried to narrow it down, but I have a few slides, so I'll share that now. You might need to give me permission. Thank you. So I really want to talk about open education technology more broadly and how it relates with open recognition. I'm not going to go into too much about open recognition itself because everyone else has been doing that terrifically. I'm mostly known for being the CEO and founder of Moodle, the learning management system, open source. And but I have also recently founded something called Open EdTech Global, which I'll be talking about. And I'm also a board director in the Open Education Global. And if you can sort of see where my interests are from that. My Twitter handle there is Moodler, or also on Mastodon. And I'll give my email at the end. So we're in a pretty crazy year from the education perspective. Back in April, we peaked with 92% of the world's school and university learners suddenly not being able to go into school. So these are UNESCO statistics. That's come down somewhat now. It's only about a third of the world, but it has led to a completely crazy response from all countries and all players involved. So we've joined the UNESCO Global Coalition, and together with a lot of partners, we are being pulled, as Moodle that is, pulled into a lot of discussions about the nature of learning and about how do we get a whole country online by next week and things like that. And it's a quite chaotic time because there are so many options and there's also so much panic. We're in a chaotic year of these kinds of things going on, constant fake news all around us. There's recessions and share markets up and down. In the education field particularly, a lot of people are seeing it as a growth area. So they're taking their money out of other areas and suddenly looking, how can I put this into education and education technology? So in this industry, there's been an explosion of startups and new ideas, and often old ideas branded as new ideas, and a lot of people buying companies. And so it's a busy waters. There's education crises of many kinds as people struggle to adapt. We've got political upheaval going on in the background. We still have a climate crisis, in case we'd all forgotten, and human rights issues. And deregulations, often because of the panic, have made this even worse. The amount of plastic we are consuming has suddenly gone up again because, we just, let's not worry about the new regulations we had, and worse. So quite a difficult year. And the vision of Moodle and why Moodle exists, if I can talk about Moodle for a little bit as some background, is that we're about empowering educators to improve the world. And that's quite a key part of it, by building an effective platform for learning. And I'll get into why education is a really good way to get to do that. But the Moodle world so far, the Moodle project is quite widespread, and we have hundreds of thousands of sites. We have millions of courses and billions of quiz questions, and it's very global. About 2/3 of the world's universities use Moodle in some way. So we have a platform, we have a place at this point in time that I hope we can start pushing changes forward. If even back some years ago, I think Moodle was able to give open badges a little push by implementing open badges in its in our platform. So suddenly a lot of people were producing open badges when they weren't before. And similarly, with new things in the future, I want to try and leverage the reach we have to push good new ideas that really help to improve the world. So in the very near term, as a quick update for any of you who are interested in Moodle, our big focus is UX and the user experience, and also on integrations with other things and tapping into a larger infrastructure and a system across the world. So let's look at the future and where we should all be going and what I'm seeing, at least. If we needed an agenda, a global agenda, this is the best thing we have. The UN's Sustainable Development Goals, 17 very big issues which break down into smaller ones about the biggest problems that we are facing as a species, as a planet. Really, there's no argument to say that this shouldn't be a focus for every single activity around the world in some way. They affect everything. This is an existential crisis, right? We may cease to exist in some years if we don't deal with these problems. So number one, this is the future we should be focusing on. And in there, number 4 is quality education. And if you dig deeper into what they're talking about in education, there are things like making primary and secondary education free, equal access of many kinds, increasing the number of people who have the relevant skills for financial success. Sounds specific, but money kind of runs the world in some way. We need to eliminate discrimination, universal literacy and numeracy. And this one in particular, which is a big one to me, is education around sustainable development goals. How do we embed sustainable development goal solutions and thinking into all curriculums? Building, upgrading schools, expanding higher ed scholarships in developing countries, and increasing the supply of teachers. So these are some of the breakdown of it. Now, the reason why I'm blowing this out is because all of these things depend on education, all of them. So education is a very critical part of the future. So let's look at some of the technology trends. That's the education trends. Well, what's the technology trends? We've got everyone's getting used to being remote. You know, I've just tuned in from Australia. I've saved myself a lot of travel to Paris. It's a shame because I love being in Paris, but I think it's better for everyone that I was just able to come in here after lunch from home. And this is not going to change. We're not going to go back. I've had a paperless office myself for about 20 years. So it works. It's easy to do. And now because of this year, I think a lot of people are coming along for the ride and we won't go back. The rise of artificial intelligence has been forecast for decades. This year, last year, I'm starting to see signs that AI is becoming so good that it's really starting to interfere with human work on a much larger scale than ever before. The things like GPT-3, it's a general purpose algorithm. You can give it one sentence and it will generate a whole article, and that in any language you want. And that article is very readable. Like it reads like a human wrote that article. The same algorithm, you can describe a web page to it in words, and it will go and create the web page. It'll design all the HTML and grab images off the internet and make a web page. This is with the same algorithm. So, and there are many, many other cases. It's able to replace huge parts of human work. So if we're educating people to be part of society, what are we educating them for? And what's the role of artificial intelligence in this? Another big trend is this between formal education and informal education. I'm a big believer in formal education. I love informal education, and I'm learning things personally all the time through many methods. I'm always trying new things out, what's around. Even things like YouTube, incredible resource that everyone uses, I think, for that just-in-time learning. There's no recognition of that, but in the formal education space, if we're going to be deliberate about our future as a species, I think we need to also be deliberate about what are the core competencies that people need for an uncertain future. Sorry, the slides keep flipping. There is an increase in fake news or just information that can't be verified. Most people now, when they search for something, they're going to land on an article. And the article is a couple of pages long, written by you don't know who, from whatever site. It's getting very, very difficult to know what's true, especially when you think a lot of these articles are going to be written by artificial intelligence, by marketers, by propagandists, and so on. And this is already all around us. It's very difficult and getting more difficult all the time to know what is fact and what is fiction. That is something that education only can fix. You need the kind of education and background to be able to judge the truthfulness of things, and that's a big problem. And lastly, and this is where we get to the technology again, is in Open EdTech, is the control of the infrastructure. This infrastructure we're using right now, we're using Zoom, which is a private company that has access to a lot of these streams. It has a lot of control over communications. I mean, it works beautifully. We're streaming onto YouTube, which is a Google infrastructure. Google is does a great job for humanity. It does terrific things. It makes it very easy to do things like we're doing today. But those things are centralized. And if we are completely dependent on these things, we are renting this technology. We are suddenly in a rental situation with a landlord, and Google and Zoom and these bigger companies become our landlords. And they can raise prices at any time. They can change conditions at any time. And we're seeing that with Facebook. We're seeing that with a lot of the bigger platforms that we are allowing to become our infrastructure, that suddenly we are the product, or we are not in control of our own destinies anymore. And we are becoming part of large profit-focused organizations. And if profit is the main motive, as it often is with these companies, it doesn't necessarily do what's best for humanity or for individuals. It does what's best for the shareholders of that particular company. So these are kind of the big issues I'm seeing in technology, and there's a battle against that. There is an increasing force of people building things openly. They're concentrating on standards. They're concentrating on distributed technology, and all these things are out there in many forms. And I'm very much part of that open movement, as you can guess. So if we look at the infrastructure for education, there are three main parts to it, in my view. Firstly, we need tools. So we need software that we can use. We need tools that help enable the sorts of things like this conference or any other education situation. Secondly, you need resources. You need content and time and support. So in the content field, there's some terrific movement with open education resources. Last year in November, the UNESCO made a resolution, better than that, a recommendation for supporting open education resources. This was unanimously signed by every country in the globe except for the US, who are not a member. And that's an amazing thing, that as humanity, we've said that open education resources are more important than, say, textbook publishing, that, you know, in the traditional publisher controlled method. And they're saying, move resources towards OER, let's shift towards OER, let's push OER. And this is an incredible success, actually, for openness. That's the policy changes. So now we actually need to implement these things. And OE Global are in there. We've got Creative Commons in this sort of area. And lastly, and this slide I should point out is something I show around the world in all sorts of talks that I do. And the third part of this infrastructure is skills. So how do we at all recognize any sort of skill or learning? And the Open Recognition Alliance is at the forefront there. And I think open badges as a piece of technology has clearly become the de facto standard, and that's great. I think there's questions on how it's applied or how it's used or how we build it into other things, but as a basic standard, it's perfectly fine. So these are just some of the tools here. So I've over here in the tools area of Open EdTech. Let me get into what that is a bit. So I see that as together with these other things. Sorry, this slide just supports what I was saying before. If you see an educator, and I've got a picture of a guru here because I want to express the idea of an educator as an expert, a professional, someone who has passion for their subject, someone who is a mentor to their students, right? I don't really like the view of a teacher as someone who just delivers content that someone else created and they're just basically there as a functionary to grade assignments. That job will be done by AI in the near future. But the real teachers in the world are the ones who inspire their students, who are able to create new citizens for the world through their own passion. And I would like them to have this platform of the three pieces: the technology, the resources, and the skills infrastructure, to both validate themselves and to also give to their students to use. So on the tech side, we had a meeting to launch the Open EdTech idea, and there was a bunch of us came together in Barcelona last November. And these are some of the companies that were represented. And we had companies, organizations. So there's universities here, there's open source projects, there's all kinds of things. And we spent 2 days having a lot of brainstorming. And the core idea of what Open EdTech is really about is this one, that any education organization or Ministry of Education, it should be able to own its own infrastructure. So not just renting it, but owning it. And that's a critical difference. It's like when you have a house. Yeah, at some point in your life, you rent a house. Maybe you rent a house for your whole life, and that's fine. But you are restricted when you rent. You're not able to live the way you fully want to. You can't knock down a wall. You can't build another room on that house. You can't put a nail in the wall sometimes. You are quite restricted. And the landlord can put their prices up. Now, when you own your own house, it's a different matter, right? You can change it how you want. You can turn your house into you can put solar panels on it. You can make it energy efficient. You can do anything you need to. It's more flexible and it's more appropriate for your context. And it's the same with software. When you're inside an infrastructure, if you own it, you have this ability to really make it more effective for your situation. So there is a site, it's quite new, at openedtech.global, which is the core of the project. And what that will be is there's a new association being formed of organizations who want to be part of promoting this idea of Open EdTech. And the vision that we're promoting is that quality education requires constant adaptation and collaboration. What we are educating people in is always changing. The skills are changing, the content is changing, everything is changing, and we need to collaborate to do that. And the best way to have an adaptive, collaborative environment is to have an infrastructure of open technology. And I can, looking at those Moodle stats from earlier, you can see Moodle's got very broad appeal. It's used in many, many places precisely because it gives people this kind of ability. And Open EdTech supports 5 of the SDGs. So not only quality education, but infrastructure, reducing inequalities, peace, justice, and strong institutions, because it helps support an institution to grow itself, and partnerships. And so this new association will, which we're still forming the association, will be based in Brussels. It's been a bit held up by all the coronavirus craziness this year. But the idea is that each project, each open source project that becomes certified or as a member of this association will have some criteria that it has to meet. So it has to be an open source. It has to have a sustainable funding model around services, but not the software. So you can get the software and own the software. You only would contribute back to the project financially if you needed help, if you need services. So that kind of service model works quite well. Often people just need some help. They need to call someone and pay someone for some help. The projects have to actively support a community of open source developers. This is critical because you need the ability to keep evolving and changing, and you need to support that. That sort of community doesn't just happen. You need to make a place for it to happen. And many open source projects that go out there, people say, oh, I've written some software and I'm putting it out there as open source. But if you just put it out there on the internet, it will die over time because it doesn't have the lifeblood of developers to keep it going. And lastly, and most importantly, these projects need to work very closely with their educator communities to define the roadmap. It has to be fit for the purpose of education. Otherwise, what are we here for? So this is like a definition of what open education technology is. And we would like to certify projects that match this. Now, there's a few here that I think would pass this kind of criteria. So Moodle, for example, H5P for content, Mahara for portfolios, Open edX, another learning platform, MOOC-based mostly, Koha is a library system, Learning Planet, a very interesting, more content-based network out of France. MoodleNet is our initiative. We're building also a social network. Nextcloud is a good replacement for Office 365 or Google Docs. EduMeet is a video conferencing package made by Giant in Europe, very good one. Big Blue Button is another video conferencing package more for classrooms. And Badger, which I think a lot of you will be familiar with, made by Concentric Sky or maintained by Concentric Sky, which is a good home for badges and the things they're building on top of it. Now, there are big projects ahead of us. There are things that don't exist in the world. So one of them is, I think, there's no such thing as a kind of global federated education cloud. And this is a problem in that a lot of the little initiatives that get started to create open education resources, or even the badge related projects, some of them that I've seen, they rely on the storage and the infrastructure sitting with some .com or .org or some organization. There is no global protected space that you can put things in and expect them to still be there in 50 years. And I think we could build that. We could build a cloud that is supported by everybody that is owned by everybody. Integration, interoperability being between things. All these softwares need integrations improved. We need to get more funding towards open EdTech projects. There's a lot of European funding going towards different things, not always open things. And globally as well, there's a lot of funding going into commercial things, which I don't think is good for the world in the long run. And here's the big one for this conference, the global recognition of all learning. Like, how do we make it so that even like myself as an employer right now, you know, I'm hiring people all the time. Not once in the last 5 years has anyone given me open badges to demonstrate their skills. And yet open badges has been out there for this time. And why is that? Because the infrastructure doesn't exist properly. We don't have a global infrastructure that encourages us to use these tools. And lastly, there's a change management education process for institutions themselves to learn to use these things and be part of these things. So these are some of the projects that I see Open EdTech should be working on. So I have 2 questions for you. I know we haven't got a lot of question time, but you can email me or contact me afterwards if you have answers. The first one is, what is the most effective, the most open technological infrastructure that you know of or that you can imagine for the future of open recognition? If you know of things, I would love to know. Like I don't know of enough here, and I really would love you to educate me. So I want ideas, and perhaps we can keep going with discussion on that. The second one is, in my Moodle role, I want to know, what does a learning management system need to do in the future to be part of a global recognition of some kind? So that's something I would like to know. So in short, to finish up, I just want to say I encourage you, in whatever role you're in, just to help fight for the future of open education. I don't think we all want to see a future where Microsoft or Tencent or Amazon are controlling our infrastructure for education. Like, you know, they do a lot of good things, but I don't think they should control the infrastructure of education, and for some of the reasons I'm explaining. So hopefully you can see that too. And we're not gonna make that fight succeed unless we have a lot of people helping and fighting for open things and working together to make it happen. So thank you very much for the time and for listening. There's my contact details if you want to email me, martin@moodle.com, or hit me up on the socials. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Martin. Okay.
Do we have the time for discussion?
Yes, we have the time for discussion.
We're 30 minutes, no?
We have 30 minutes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Comfortable.
Good.
Yes.
If you're available. Yes, Martin?
Are you
Yeah,
available?
I'm here.
Yeah?
Sure. Yeah. No, I didn't realize you said 30 minutes to talk, so I thought I had 30 minutes total.
It's good. Like we have another 30 minutes to discuss together.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Awesome.
So perhaps we could start. I copied a comment. You told, as an employer, I never saw someone show me a badge.
Yeah. Correct.
That's a good start, I think, for
And that's
first
like
question.
thousands of people probably with CVs that we've looked at.
Yes, because perhaps I can say something on that, Serge, because we are fighting against the image of badges that are only for employment, to get a job.
Sure.
And also as badges that are we can only display on a CV. Because we can do much more with open badges. Because open badges have many functions. They can make things visible because you share them, you display them on networks. You can give a badge, you can receive a badge. Badges can be documented. We like the idea of open badges as micro portfolios where you can document practices, your own practices. Open badges as also a means to show what you are learning to others, not only a badge who says I have skills, you know.
Yep.
Badges are also connectors. If I publish a badge to support Open EdTech, anyone can claim this badge and make so the community visible. So these are some thoughts I wanted to share with you, because that's what we are explaining a lot in our networks.
I am very aware of those, and I agree with them, all of them. And we use badges internally for different little things. But I'm just saying that this is an example of a situation where somebody might want to communicate what they're learning and their skills and other things as well. And even in this even in that limited situation of applying for a job, I've never once seen one presented. And I'm not saying that's the only use case at all, but
Okay.
it is certainly one use case, and in that narrow use case.
You are right when you say open badges are now out since almost 10 years now, and still we don't see them in our daily activities. But it's because it's not easy. It's also because people make a relation to the other forms of recognition, formal recognition, like diplomas, and the question is always around the value, and also because employers still don't really know about open badges. But in France, there is much more interest now, because everyone, a lot of organization and people feel that our current recognition system or tools is not functioning anymore. It's not good anymore, and that we need in our world where we are always learning, formal and informal, but much more informal, I think. We need new tools. But still, there is a lot to do. And but we have quite success in France, because we have I wrote something about this to you, about recognition of prior learning, of VAE, validation of acquired experience. There's a report that is will be published soon, and who may transform really deeply how we recognize the experience. Perhaps, Serge, you can say some words about the REVA project.
Yes, basically is to dissociate recognition from accreditation, and to look accreditation as being the cherry on the cake. But what you really want is the cake, which is recognition. The problem is we tend to look at accreditation as the only way to recognize. Well, accreditation should be considered as ancillary to recognition. It's one of the ways to recognize. But I wanted to go back to your presentation, Martin, about SDGs. Attributed to the conversation about badges. You said there should be education about SDGs. My comment would say would be that
and not about SDGs themselves, but about embedding them into every subject, basically.
Yes, yes, I understand. And the thing is, how can we expect that using methods that have failed us are part of the solution? And we can say that the education has failed us, because if we are in the mess we are today, education has played a role. We can't just blame the industry, because at the end, the industry is created by people who have been through the education system. And so my recommendation for SDGs would be to not try to make them part of the curriculum. Forget about the curriculum and SDG as in the curriculum, but make them part of practices. And that everybody is reflecting about these practices as a teacher, as a learner, in the discipline, as a worker, in relation to SDGs. So SDGs should be related to practices first and foremost before anybody think to add a bit of it in the curriculum, because that will be some kind of greenwashing. It's very easy to put things in the curriculum because we have ethics part of the curriculum in some places. Putting ethics in the curriculum doesn't create ethical people. Ethics.
I disagree. I think there are a lot of ethical people who they're probably affected by those ethics courses. It obviously doesn't mean everyone, but surely it must have some effect on general ethics.
Okay, that can be discussed. But also, I think one point is about education. Okay, Open EdTech, and in our world, which is recognition, there is a whole group of people that are counselors, advisors. They are not educators. For example, we have a project in Normandy with the Centre Interinstitutionnel de Bilan de Compétences. And what these people do is basically they take people who are out of work or want to change careers, and they recognize them. They help them to reflect on their practices, the competencies they have developed. And so the recognition is a starting point. Mm-hmm. The problem we have as educators, we tend to think as recognition is something that comes at the end. You learn, and at the end you will have some kind of a credential to testify that you have learned something. But in the world we are living now, recognition is a starting point. And educators are not the best at doing it, because educators are a bit like the person with a hammer. Everything looks like a nail. They think that, okay, I'll give you some kind of they will think about skills gap analysis. They will see what people are missing in order to achieve a specific diploma. And I finish that with the way we think about VAO today, the recognition of prior learning. The problem with recognition of prior learning today, in general, all over the world, is we tend to align the recognition with existing diploma, with existing qualification. What we want to do is to make the recognition process a learning process for the organization in charge of recognition. Because you want to be able to recognize emerging practices, and not just practices that have been formalized 5 or 10 years ago. The practice of a person is by essence multidisciplinary. Diploma qualification are monodisciplinary. And if you take RPL today, RPL can maybe recognize 10 or 20% of person experience. And what we need to do is to be able to recognize 100% of a person experience, and we need to be able to recognize everybody and not just 5 or 10% of people who will jump through the hoops of recognition of prior learning. And so this is where recognition exists on its own, if you want. It doesn't exist necessarily in relation to education.
No, I agree, I have a broader view of education. Like education, this is education, right? Education is browsing on the internet. Education is making a video. Education is talking to a friend or with your family. Like, they're all education. But there's no point. You can't have the situation where you can recognize 100% of somebody's learning without building it into software at some point. It needs to be built into software, and at all levels, like everywhere. Otherwise, there's no way to possibly handle that amount of information with 8 billion people and everybody has thousands of points of data. We need infrastructure, and that is all education. I'm not by any means saying formal education is the only thing, and I don't have that traditional view of formal education like you may have connected me to.
No, I don't.
But what there is an important aspect of a common infrastructure that we design and build and share and spread, and like HTTP as a way to get web pages around. That infrastructure of the web was a genius piece of work that sat on top of other layers of technology and allowed anybody to make a page to put out to anyone to get. We need to think of something that basic, and until we build that and design it, we are always going to get 2-3% of people's skills, or for 2-3% of people.
Yeah, but I think the problem is when we start to recognize the skills and not the person. When we try to describe a person through a set of attributes. And I think you need to start by recognizing the person. You need to recognize the equality of intelligence.
So how would you do that? How do you do that?
Just by recognizing Dougiamas. I recognize you as a person. I recognize you for your values.
But how are you recognizing what I know or don't know?
I start by recognizing you as a person. I think this is a starting point. Just give you an example. Maybe I mentioned it before, but Claire Hébert-Suffren, who is the vice president, well, not the vice, she's a présidente d'honneur of Reconnaître. She tells a story that she was a teacher in the 70s in the suburbs of Paris, in Orly. And she has a problem with the pupils who thought they were not good learners. They couldn't learn anything. And what did she do to make pupils understand they could learn something? If I talk to an educator, the educators will say, well, I'll give them something not too difficult to learn, and they will say that they will discover they can learn something. The problem is if they fail, it's even worse. So what did Claire told her pupils? Teach me something. That is, she recognized her pupils as her equals. So if you want to build a recognition society, you need to start by recognizing the equality of intelligence. You need to have a symmetrical system, a democratic reciprocal recognition. The problem, if you start I don't say that you shouldn't recognize skills, but if you make it the alpha and omega of a recognition system, then you fail the system, because then it is a process of verification of the individual into a set of attributes. So you need to start creating a system where you recognize a person as a very first, this is a starting point and not an ending point.
So is that the philosophical part, Serge? But Martin wanted to know, how do you transform this in a new protocol? Perhaps you have some ideas on a new protocol, Serge?
We call it bit of trust.
If every recognition relies on two people having an extended interaction, then you have an n² problem with 8 billion people times 8 billion people, which is unscalable, right? We have to somehow capture things sometimes and say, you know what, Serge and Philippe, you've been talking for years, you recognize things in each other. How do you record that so that I can benefit from your recognition?
Because and this is the whole point, is because recognition is something which is hyper-local. Even if you take a Harvard diploma, Harvard is hyper-local. It's a few square meters, Harvard. Then it is globally recognized, but because the recognition is hyper-local. So recognition is a very hyper-local mechanism. And this is because it is hyper-local that it can have a global value. And I think because I trust you as a human being, and I'm related to you in some ways, I'm related to Philippe, I'm related to other people, then by making these connections visible, making this trust relationship visible, not necessarily with skills associated to that, And because
Yeah.
what I want to be able to say, I would like to have someone like Dougiamas to work with on my
Martin.
Bit of Trust project.
Yeah.
I'll stop there. But
Yep. Yeah, and that's my issue. I want, like, and so if I put my employer hat on again, you know, like I have 80 people in my company and I have 100 other companies that I work with, and there's a lot of judgments to be made continuously about people, in terms of who works with who, and how does this person belong in this project to work on this thing, or, you know, do you want them in the group or not in the group? And there's a lot of judgments all the time. And it's almost impossible to do it with one interview and a CV. Like, it's not enough. We need a very rich. I can't, but I also can't work with everyone for 6 months to work it out myself. So what I think we all need is this shorthand method of capturing stuff.
Can I? But what happens in real life? When I'm an employee, I want to hire someone. I can do interviews myself, but sometimes I don't have the time for that. So what am I doing? I'm calling a friend. Hey, do you know someone who's good at that? And if my friend tells me, I know this guy, Serge, he's good at open badges, you won't ask for the CV because you have trust in me. So you will say, okay, bring this guy to me. I trust you. You told me he's good. So
Yep.
I will hire him.
Well, that's a signed badge. He signed it, and the badge
It's
is
a badge,
he's good
or
at badges.
but that's how it happens in real life. It's
Yeah.
a networking, you know, and a lot of people are have success because they have a large network, and they're using their network to find jobs, opportunities, and they don't have every time to show their diploma and CV. It's only networking. So Serge don't have time, I think, to explain what is his idea of bit of trust, but it's a new protocol. It's trying to transform these ideas into something, into software, into protocol, so we can make our trust network visible, so we can do something with it. Is it correctly presented, Serge?
Yeah, if you want to create a web of trust, start with a web of trust of two.
Yeah.
Because web of trust is web of trust of two, and then you aggregate them like we did with badges. And if we can make trust visible in different contexts, then we have a very powerful tool to have an impact on society and social inclusion.
I would
I
love
started
would love to see that. But like at the moment, LinkedIn is owning that space. Microsoft's product there.
oh yes,
and I can't trust the so-called trust, because people can lie on that a lot. And you need a lot of people to contribute. You need to have parallel trusts, I guess, to have some sort of confidence in any of that. It's the signing of it. Like one job, we have a job, we have a need for a business analyst right now in Moodle. We need someone who's good with numbers, who's really good at analyzing numbers. We asked for people to apply. We have 500 applicants. And what I would love to do is kind of design the shape of the job and describe it in a way, including personal attributes, not just learning or certifications, but personal attributes, and say, here is the shape, the hole that we have to fill. Who fits the hole the best? and I want that to be reliable. And I want any substantial recognition to somehow be digitally signed and qualified. Like, so I can trust the trust. I can trust the trust things as well. Like, there's a lot of layers of trust. But I'd be very interested to look into a bit of trust protocol more deeply.
hey,
And hopefully,
it's something we can discuss later, because we can talk one day around this. Perhaps you had another question to us. What could an LMS like Moodle do with open recognition? first I want to say that the idea of Moodle is at the beginning very good, because everyone can be learner or teacher. You don't come with a teacher role in Moodle, but you can be a learner or a teacher. That's what I really like in Moodle. The question with open technologies is that they may be open software, but not open to a recognition. I explain myself. In some other LMSs, I see badges that are connected to competency. So first you think competency, and then you get the related badge. These kind of uses, we don't promote them. What we promote, for example, and I can say that agriculture education in France is funding a new plugin for Moodle, is a badge as an enrollment method in a course. You had already this kind of plugin, but it was based on Open Badges system badges. But what we are doing with this plugin is, if I have a badge, I can use Open Badges. I get it from any platform. I can claim it. When I connect to Moodle with Badge Connect API, Moodle can read in my backpack and say, oh, you have this badge, and there is a course where the enrollment method is with this badge also. So it means you are invited to join the community. So it's an example that it's really, I think, very interesting for users of open badges to make them actionable. So these kind of ideas, Moodle can help by, well, integrating these kind of ideas in LMSs.
Yeah, that's a good one.
I'm suggesting an acronym for Martin. Sorry, I'm a bit tired today because I've been almost during 72 hours awake. I don't know how I called you. I called you Dougiam, or I'm sorry.
No, Martin.
Dougiamas, yeah.
Oh, sorry, God.
Sorry.
I'm a bit tired. Yes, I suggest the acronym RED for Recognition and Education Technology. Like that, who could wave the red flag.
Ret, I think, but yeah, okay. I hope there's no red flags here. I hope it's all green flags, because we need successful solutions, because we actually have quite serious issues to fix. If I look at the way education is going in say the US, and everything's being privatized and corporatized and commoditized, it doesn't seem to be working over there. Let's put it that way. And we need to have very strong, and unfortunately all the technology companies, a lot of them in EdTech, are there serving those markets first. So we don't want that to spread around the world. We have to have strong alternatives that are we have a very strong philosophical background and very strong technological background.
Oops. And they are part of that.
Yeah, well, exactly. It's the profit focus in the end, right? Yeah. So let's talk more about the bit of trust protocol, and if anyone else has any good ideas for me, I'd love to hear them as well after this. So
what we are struggling also in France, Martin, is how to get that our ministries fund open source, because we know there are very good open source projects, and very sadly, still Microsoft, for example, is sometimes funded by our ministries. We have a big movement in France. It's called Framasoft. It's only frama.org. It's only open source, but they don't have a lot of funding. And when came the crisis, they have a small servers, and everyone was on the servers, and they said, "Hey, teachers, we are a small association. Ask your ministry to fund us so we can buy some better servers." So we are also working with you on this idea that if we could have public funding for these projects to build an open infrastructure for our education system, it would be very intelligent from our governments.
Yeah, and a good place to look is because one of our Moodle offices in Barcelona, and I was quite good friends with the city there, and particularly someone there called Francesca Bria.
Yes, I listened to that interview. Yeah,
and the digital cities that they are building. It's a lot of open source infrastructure and open data, open policies. They have they've put in regulations such that every new, if the city has an arrangement for, say, trucks to take away rubbish or something, a new contract, that every contract must say all the data generated by that company must come back to the city and be available for the whole city, for everyone and all people, which is these kind of policies. They are coming in. There are changes happening. There's good stuff going on, and I see this fight happening. You know, it's kind of it's both sides are pushing, but the more we can support open initiatives, I think it's going to be better for the longer term.
And we need to have people with business acumen like you that help others to grow and develop sustainable models for open source, because I think this is a big conundrum for people. They think if it is open source, then there is no real business model behind that. And we need to really promote this idea of what kind of business model is there with open source. And you're a great example of success for that. And we need your support in that dimension, not just to support open source as an idea, but to support the business model behind open source.
Yeah, thanks. And that's why one of those criteria on Open EdTech is that it must have a sustainable business model. You need to think through, because if you look at, I love nature. I spend a lot of time in nature, and you look at how nature works and how organisms work. We are all made of cells, right? Little cells. These cells don't know about us. The cells think they're autonomous. They're just little individual creatures communicating with energy and chemicals. They kind of create us as an organism to carry the cells around, and all of nature is like that, trees and everything. And now we are creating organisms bigger than ourselves. We are creating governments, associations, and companies, and all these things, which are like organisms, an extension of us. The question is, on this little planet here, what kind of organisms these large ones do we want to be the citizens of this thing? And we're building them. We need to build things that have their own life and are ethical and are good to us and good to the planet. And it's very, very important to get the sustainability right. Sustainability, and is the key thing.
Martin,
thank you.
Thank you
very much. So
thanks for your conference. I'll be watching on YouTube, and have a great day. See you later.
Thank you. Au revoir, Martine.
Au revoir.
Martine qui était à Perth et qui nous a fait le plaisir de présenter présenter le projet Open EdTech